wanted to be here and be a flight director when we went back to the moon, and at the time that was considered, well, you can't stay in the flight director office that long. So I'm pretty glad I stuck around.
If I could, I might just add to that. So, Charlie's obviously a beloved member of our team. She's the leader of our launch team. I had a tie earlier today. Charlie wears green on launch day. Charlie has something green. She does her nails green, and so the guys wore green ties today. Just to kind of support Charlie. And if it's your first launch in a new position in the firing room, after the launch, she cuts your tie. And so I don't have a tie today because she cut my green tie. And there were a lot of green ties getting cut. And it was really in support of a pretty amazing member of our team who happened to be a female. Yeah.
Thank you both. Next up, we have a question on the phones from David Curley with Discovery.
Thank you, Jackie. Mike Seraphin, can you talk a little bit more about day 26? That's your primary goal on this mission, and the heat shield. How are you feeling about it? What will you be thinking over the next 25 days?
Yeah, David, thank you for that question. As I said at the outset, we've bought down half of our priority one already through the rocket setting up those initial conditions. We do have a long 4-week mission ahead of us, and we're just going to work it day by day, and we need to work it with vigilance, and we are going to do some extraordinarily hard stuff. We're going to fly within 62 miles of the surface of the moon and use a lunar gravity assist to insert us into what is called the distant retrograde orbit, and then shake down the spacecraft while it's out there, and then on the return fly another 62 miles from the surface of the moon and use a lunar gravity assist to send us back to Earth. And we need to do it with enough precision that we hit from 250,000 miles away. That is essentially our deorbit maneuver. We need to do it with enough precision that we don't skip back out into deep space, or that we don't come in too steep and overstress the vehicle. So there's a lot ahead of us. We're just going to work it day by day. We're actually going to share some fun stuff along the way. We're going to share imagery similar to what we did earlier today of, kind of first shots of the Earth from the spacecraft. We're going to share imagery from inside the cockpit. We're going to share imagery close up of the moon. But there's a lot of hard stuff that we've got to demonstrate. And at the tail end, kind of our capstone is going to be the high-speed reentry. We're going to come back at Mach 32, or 24,500 miles an hour. We're going to slow that spacecraft in about 20 minutes as it goes from entry interface to subsonic and parachute deployment, and then splash down in the Pacific. When we get to that point, it will signal the arrival of our deep spacecraft and human transportation, and it will show that we've got a capability in place in combination with the rocket that we've already demonstrated that puts us on a path to accomplish the rest of the Artemis manifest in front of us. So again, we've got to take it day by day. We're going to learn stuff as we go. We've got thousands and thousands of measurements and data and engineering measurements we're going to take along the way to ensure that we understand the margins, and if they're a little bit less than we thought they were, we need to take those into account before we put humans on board. So we're going to learn a lot from this mission, and if we're lucky and we fly right down the middle, that'll be a great day. And if we learn from it, that goes back to why we're having an uncrewed test flight and why we purposefully set up an uncrewed mission before we're going to fly astronauts on the next mission.
Thanks, Mike. I think we're running up on our hour, but we do have time for a couple more questions in the room. Here in front.
Yep. John Zarella for My Radar. A couple of things. How much do you lose by not flying the 40 days plus you're down to 25 days you have the mannequins on board and you're gathering all this data? For anybody who wants to answer that. And the other one was, over the course of the months, we've talked to so many folks on your team who have been with the program since the very beginning, more than 10 years. What do you have to say to long-timers out there who persevered? And as you said, Mr. Administrator, it's been a long time coming.
Go ahead.
Start. Well, I'll answer your second question. I'm a long timer myself, and I've been with the Orion program since the very beginning. I would say to my colleagues and the people that came before me, I mean, it is obviously a historic day for us. We've dreamed about this day. We've worked very hard, persevered through a lot of challenges, not only weather and other things, changes in terms of administration and such, but it represents. I think John said it very well. The hardware is the hardware will perform. It's the people across the country, and in fact in Europe as well, working with us, spending long hours trying to make this endeavor happen. And I think it's a very proud moment. And I look at what we did today, and I reflect back upon all the late nights and the long hours we worked together with all the people that across the country, like I said, in Europe, trying to make this happen. And we should all be proud of what we've accomplished so far, but we've got a ways to go. And each day is going to be very important for us in this mission, because I think we're going to learn a lot as we go forward. So that's how I would respond to that part of the question.
Yeah, and I would agree with Howard. Perseverance is the word of the day here. This team up here and the folks that they represent have had to persevere through quite a lot over the years, and months and months and months of preparation and testing and coding and just understanding on the ground what the systems are capable of, are representative of where we got to today. But in terms of whether we lose objectives through a 26-day mission instead of a 40 to 42-day mission, it is in the margins of extra data takes. The longer time we have out there in the distant retrograde orbit allows us to get more data, but we would still accomplish all the objectives. When we baselined the Artemis 1 mission, it was originally just a 26-day mission. And when we started looking at the mission availability, we realized that we couldn't launch as frequently as we would like. The launch availability was roughly 1 week per month. And we asked the team, can you come up with a solution to improve our mission availability? And they came up with what we call a variable mission duration. We had a short class and a long class mission, and in the middle, you extend the stay about the moon in the distant retrograde orbit, and that actually doubled our mission availability, so we could launch roughly 2 weeks per month, or roughly half the month. And that was seen as a win in terms of mission availability, and also in terms of buying down risk. But we're flying a 26-day mission, and that is originally what we had intended. It just gives us fewer data take opportunities for a whole host of things, but we are confident that in the time frame that we're talking about flying, that we can get enough engineering data to say that we can fly crew with confidence on the next mission.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. Not hearing any in the room, so we have one more on the phones with Jim McKenna with Aerospace Tech Review.
Thanks very much. For Mike, and you may have already addressed this, but what's the next big milestone that will affirm your confidence that you're writing down the risk of the mission and the vehicle? And also, I think for Emily, when does the Orion arrive at the moon?
Okay. Emily, do you want to start?
I don't think I have that particular piece of date. Let me see if I can remember it. You go first, and I'll see if I can remember it.
I might be able to help you on both accounts. So, in terms of the next big milestone, it would be what we call the outbound trajectory correction maneuver, which would be the first firing of the propulsion system on the Orion spacecraft, the service module. We purposefully have a 30-second firing of the service module engine, and that happens just under 8 hours into the mission. So 7 hours, 47 minutes into the mission. And then, I'm sorry, Jim, I lost the... When do we
That was
arrive at
it.
the distant
The other
retrograde orbit?
question
I've got it here. Give me just a second.
Yeah, it's roughly a week.
Yeah.
And then we spend about a week in the orbit, and then we spend about a week coming home.
There's a reason I write this stuff down, Jim. Hang on just a second. We actually issue memos on this while I'm stalling for time, just to keep everybody synchronized. I will find it, Jim, here. Hang on just a second. All right, so outbound powered flyby is on the 21st. It's 7:44 Eastern time in the morning. So that is the first of the 2 maneuver sequence that does that lunar flyby in the slingshot 62 miles from the surface of the moon. We do that behind the moon, by the way, so we're not going to see it until after the maneuver is complete. So we're kind of blind, and we'll when we get acquisition of signal on the spacecraft afterward, we'll know that the maneuver was successful. And then the second of the maneuvers for the distant retrograde insertion is on the 25th. So I guess that's the day after Thanksgiving at 4:52 p.m. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you all so much. That's all the time we have this morning. But the Artemis 1 mission is just beginning. In just a few hours, we'll have live TV coverage and commentary of Orion's first outbound trajectory burn that Mike just mentioned. So stay tuned at nasa.gov/live and go Artemis.
Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiate. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good.
Well, in my left hand I have a feather. In my right hand a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that
Captain, a giant wardrobe is directly ahead. Then we definitely need to go there. Black Friday on GG, shopping to infinity and beyond.
And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance. Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. Altogether with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS scope for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS scope for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
Go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing
15.
under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen
GLS,
burn-off
go for
igniters
core stage
initiated.
engine
7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
Engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston. All good calls so far. Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q. Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange. We just had confirmation that the service module fairing has separated. And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, We just heard the call for 3-engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange. We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent. We saw those solid rocket boosters jettison about 2 minutes and 11 seconds after liftoff. Shortly after, we had the service module panels fairings separate, as well as the launch abort system. The launch abort system was inert for this flight, except to perform this separation. Those 4 core stage engines will continue to fire and power the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 6,800 miles per hour, 229 miles downrange. Booster flight controller reports that the engines are looking good. Our core stage main engine cutoff time is about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. We are now 5 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, 7,656 miles per hour. Again, 4 good core stage engines, those 4 RS-25 engines. The last time those core stage engines flew, they were taking space shuttles to orbit, and now with upgraded capabilities, they're launching the future of human spaceflight. Five minutes, 42 seconds into the mission, we are now traveling 8,800 miles per hour, 345 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. Again, we are anticipating core stage main engine cutoff at about 8 minutes and 3 seconds. And about 10 seconds later, we'll see core stage separation, at which point Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage will be flying free. Now traveling over 10,000 miles per hour, 6 minutes and 15 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1, 427 miles downrange. Quiet here on the loops in Mission Control Houston. Teams continue to monitor this first flight. About a minute and a half now until that core stage main engine cutoff time. Our 4 core stage engines continue to fire at maximum thrust. Coming up on 7 minutes since launch today, now traveling over 12,800 miles per hour, 563 miles downrange. Again, still quiet here in Mission Control Houston. As we prepare for main engine cutoff, the 4 RS-25 engines are beginning to throttle down. "30 seconds now until core stage main engine cutoff. All 4 engines continue to throttle down. Now 7 minutes, 45 seconds into the flight, traveling over 16,000 miles per hour. Continuing to hear good calls here in Mission Control Houston. We're standing by for core stage main engine cutoff. And we have confirmation of core stage main engine cutoff. Orion is now in Earth's orbit. The flight dynamics officer reports that we have a nominal main engine cutoff. And we just heard the call for core stage separation. That means Orion and the interim cryogenic propulsion stage are now flying free from the core stage of the Space Launch System. The next milestone will be solar array deploy approximately 18 minutes after liftoff.
Jumia Black Friday is here. Get beta IC on quality products like phones, TVs, fashion, and more with warranty and insurance from 4th to 30th November. Download the Jumia app today.
Rocket Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. New possibilities are opening up for scientific cooperation between countries. 1, 0, 0. Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower. Discovery, go and throttle up. Discovery rocket, go for deploy. And everybody in the shuttle program, the crew is go for launch. Roger, nice to be in orbit. We have followed in their footsteps to get us where we are today.
Good morning and welcome back to the International Space Station Flight Control Room. I'm NASA's Shaniqua Vereen, and you are watching live mission coverage for the NASA SpaceX Crew 4 mission. Today we are returning 4 astronauts home after a 6-month science mission aboard the International Space Station.
Houston Station on 2. With you on 2, Josh. Yeah, as you probably already heard, sounded like there is no fire there in the Russian segment. We've got zeros on our CSA CPs here in node 2. So if you agree, I think we're stepping back into the Dragon procedures. Do you? We don't need to. Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Josh. Go ahead on 2. Yep, thank you again for that report. We're waiting on our colleagues in the Russian segment to give us the CSA CP readings there. Other than that, we will let you know when we are continuing. Okay, copy that. We will stand by on resuming the Dragon numbers. Good read.
Again, you're watching live mission coverage of NASA SpaceX Crew 4 mission, returning 4 astronauts home from a 6-month stay aboard the International Space Station. Mission control teams here and at SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, have delayed today's undocking time, moving it to the right about 30 minutes. We're looking at 11:05 a.m. Central Time for an undocking, the middle of a 1-hour undocking window to allow crew on the International Space Station to check the hatch alignment on the ISS side of the docking interface. Crews are proceeding now with vestibule depressurization and moving along towards that 11:05 a.m. Central Time undocking. Today's undocking is autonomous, but will be monitored by ground controllers here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room and in Hawthorne, California. Teams are being led here by Flight Director Adi Boulos.
Station Houston on the big loop, letting you know that we did get confirmation that this was a false fire, and we are continuing on the undock procedures.
Copy, thanks.
Mission copies, and we are in step 3.1 of U.S. hatch seal inspection.
Currently getting a live view inside of SpaceX Dragon Freedom attached to the space-facing port of the Harmony module. Dragon is returning to Earth later today, expected still at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, returning a crew of 4 along with hundreds of pounds of return cargo. We're looking for Dragon to depart the station again. That's 11:05 a.m. Central Time. Upon undocking, Dragon will have a small set of firings or burns to push it away from the station. Again, we're looking for a deorbit burn to come a few hours later. Looking at around a 3 o'clock deorbit burn for a 3:55 p.m. Central Time splashdown off the coast of Florida, and that's Jacksonville, Florida.
Houston Station on 2 for hatch seal inspection. The Node 2 Zenith hatch seal is complete and no anomalies. Houston copies.
There are a couple milestones we'll see Dragon meet this morning. First, those departure burns, but then it will cross the keep out sphere, an invisible line around the station with a 200-meter radius. It will keep heading away from the station and will stand by until it makes its way out of the approach ellipsoid, another invisible line considered the neighborhood of the station. These invisible lines are where we have checkpoints for the vehicle on the way to and from the station. Once that command to undock is sent, we will be looking for 2 sets of 6 hooks from the International Space Station to be released from Dragon Freedom. After open, 2 small undocking burns that will last less than 2 seconds, and we'll begin to see separation of the vehicle. The spacecraft will start to slowly drift away. Next, Dragon will have a few departure burns to get it into the proper position away from station for its eventual deorbit burn, scheduled later today at 3:01 p.m. Central Time. That will slow Dragon down enough to drop it out of orbit and send it towards its landing zone, splashing down at approximately 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern.
Houston Station on 2, those PMA 3 closeout photos are on SSC 17. Copy.
If you're just joining us, the crew Dragon Freedom, along with Crew 4, is ready to depart the space station, having arrived on April 27th. The crew consists of NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and ESA astronaut Samantha Christopher Reddy.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop for timeline impacts and return to Earth plan. Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop for timeline impacts and return to Earth plan.
Working on the big loop.
HL, we've got some time to talk here, so I want to walk through the plan for the next few hours and give you a chance to ask any questions you might have. First, we expect about 20 minutes remaining here on the vestibule leak check, complete around 1550. After that, we have some final vehicle reconfigurations prior to undock and are targeting 1600 for undock sequence start. How copy?
$1,600 for undock sequence start.
Good copy. Some more words. After we undock, we are targeting Jacksonville as primary with Tallahassee as an alternate 24 hours later. And to get down to Jacksonville, we've got depart burns 1, 2, and 3, 1 prop waste burn, and then the deorbit burn. Expect all the events on your timeline through depart burn 3 to shift 30 minutes, but the prop waste burn and deorbit burn timing is accurate. How copy?
We copy all.
Continuing, latest forecast in Jacksonville shows winds averaging below 7 knots, shallow waves, no rain, great weather to land. Our recovery vessel Megan is on site, not tracking any issues. They're ready to get you out of the water. And I just got word from Rick on the boat. He said, see you soon.
Got the good looking weather. Megan is on station and has no issues, and we are looking forward to seeing where there's snow and things.
And a few more words on timeline. After we undock, it's a bit of an expedited timeline to splash down. You're out of suits for less than 2 hours. I'm going to leave it up to y'all to manage suit stowage as appropriate. We're going to plan a PMC after depart burn 2, and I'll leave it up to you to take it or waive it at that time. How copy so far?
Copy. It's going to have shorter time out of suits. We'll manage the suit stowage and schedule PNC after depart burn 2.
Good copy. Continuing, manual control of cabin temperature is not going to work through 4.080 as we start to cool the vehicle prior to deorbit. And as a final note, I'm going to have you step into 4.700 now to get a head start on cabin configuration for the deorbit sequence. I've got 2 notes on that procedure. The first is that pre-chill is not necessary in section 1. Essentially skip that section. Second note, floater cam inspection not necessary in section 4. So similarly to suits, we'll be looking to you to manage cargo and have the cabin configured for entry prior to suit leak checks at 18:55. How copy?
Copy. We're skipping pre-chill and then step. We will not be getting the floater camera out, but we will be managing stowage and cargo prior to 18:55.
Good copy on all. And now a question for you. Do you have any questions for the team down here in Hawthorne?
I would like to know what the froyo of the day is.
And Freedom, we've got vanilla and orange guava sorbet here. I don't expect you'll make it here this week, but we'll see you soon here in Hawthorne.
Great. Sure appreciate it. We don't have any other questions. We're looking forward to seeing folks on the Megan.
Copy all, Freedom. We're looking forward to seeing you as well, and I'll be back with you shortly on vestibule leak check status.
And with that, Houston Station on 2, we've got the Node 2 overhead hatch and MPEV closed, and you've already got the SSC 17 for those downlink photos.
Copy.
And you just heard a message from Jake Vendel, the core in SpaceX Mission Control, the crew operations resource engineer, reporting to Dragon Commander Kjell Lindgren that they do have a 30-minute delay in today's undocking time. Again, we're moving that to the right to 11:05 a.m. Central Time, the middle of a 1-hour undocking window, and this allowed the crew on the ISS time to check the hatch alignment on the ISS side of the docking interface. Crews are currently in vestibule leak check, and we're waiting to see that moves forward nominally. NASA and SpaceX are still targeting a 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Wrapping up nearly 6-month science mission for NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and ESA astronaut Samantha Christopher Reddy.
Station Tsukuba on Space Ground 2 for Koichi. When you have a chance, give us a call on Space Ground 3.
Taking another live look at the SpaceX Dragon Freedom attached to the space-facing port of the Harmony module. Dragon is returning to Earth later today, expected at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, with about 500 pounds of research and return cargo, along with the crew members. About 4 hours after Dragon departs from the station, it will conduct a deorbit burn, which will last about 16 minutes and 40 seconds. It'll then take about 30 minutes for Dragon to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere for its parachute-assisted splashdown off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. Again, we're expecting that splashdown at 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern. There are a couple milestones we'll see Dragon meet this morning. First, those departure burns, but then it will cross the keep-out sphere, an invisible line around the station with a 200-meter radius. It will keep heading away from the station and will stand by until it makes its way out of the approach ellipsoid, another invisible line considered the neighborhood of the station. These invisible lines are where we have checkpoints for the vehicle on the way to and from the station. Once that command to undock is sent, we will be looking for 2 sets of 6 hooks from the International Space Station to be released from Dragon Freedom. After open, 2 small undocking burns that will last less than 2 seconds, and we'll see separation of the vehicle from the International Space Station. The spacecraft will start to slowly drift away. Next, we'll have a few departure burns to get it into the proper position away from the station for its eventual deorbit. And we're looking for deorbit burn to be around 3:01 p.m. Central Time. That will slow Dragon down enough to drop it out of orbit and send it toward the landing zone, splashing down at approximately 3:55 p.m. Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida.
Houston and Munich on space ground 2 for the timeline.
Houston's here on 2.
Okay, I'm going to go to space ground 3 for the timeline discussion.
If you're just joining us, you're looking live inside of Dragon Freedom, where the Crew 4 astronauts are preparing for undocking today, returning after a 6-month science mission aboard the International Space Station. NASA and SpaceX are targeting an 11:05 a.m. Central Time undocking from the International Space Station, with a splashdown time of 3:55 p.m. Eastern Time, Central Time, 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida. be providing continuous coverage through splashdown and crew egress later today. In just a few minutes, our colleagues at Mission Control X, or SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, will be joining the broadcast and giving us some updates on what's been happening there. Dragon and International Space Station are currently flying 259 statute miles above the Pacific Ocean off the coast of the United States. Again, we should see and hear from our colleagues joining the broadcast from MCCX, SpaceX's Mission Control in Hawthorne, California, just here shortly.
You're looking at a live view of the Dragon Freedom spacecraft as we await its departure from the International Space Station on its way back to planet Earth. It's Friday, October 14th here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Now, we expect Dragon to push away from the space station at 9:05 a.m. Pacific or 16:05 GMT. And that will be with our Crew 4 astronauts, including Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, and European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. The crew is currently suited up and inside Dragon, and the station hatches are all sealed in preparation for departure. Thanks for tuning in to watch live coverage of Crew Dragon completing its 4th official long-duration mission for NASA's Commercial Crew Program. My name is Kate Tice, and I'm the Quality Systems Engineering Manager here at SpaceX. Joining me today from NASA Communications is Sandra Jones. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Kate. It's great to be here. So once Dragon departs station, the crew's flight home is expected to last around 5 hours. Upon separation from station, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or 4 departure burns, to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. Dragon will also execute a phasing burn to lower its orbit and line the spacecraft up with its landing location.
Next on its trip home is deorbit, entry, and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. That includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown, which will be off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover Kjell, Bob, Jessica, and Samantha. Later today, Dragon is targeted to splash down off the coast of Florida at 1:55 p.m. Pacific, and that's today, October 13th, or 4:55 p.m. Eastern Time, and followed by the crew getting picked up at sea by one of the SpaceX recovery vessels.
That's right, Kate. And today on board the International Space Station is the Expedition 68 crew. They're currently being led by Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev, who just took over as station commander from Samantha Cristoforetti, who is coming home today on Crew 4. And as a reminder, just like its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board. NASA astronaut Nicole Mann helped the crew members prepare for departure earlier today and will be watching from the cupola. But the prime departure monitoring role falls on Kjell Lindgren and Bob Hines from inside Dragon. Mission controls in Houston and Hawthorne will back them up. So let's head over to Shaniqua Vereen at the Johnson Space Center to talk a bit about how the station crew have been preparing to send the crew home and what we can expect from here until Dragon departs from station. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Sandra, and welcome back to the International Space Station Flight Control Room at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. The flight control team is primed and ready for this morning's undocking operations. Today's Orbit 2 team is being led by NASA Flight Director Adi Boulos. Since Crew 5's arrival just last week, it's been a busy week during our direct handover. Over the last several days, the astronauts worked to pack Dragon full of cargo for their return journey home. Along with the crew, Dragon will return hundreds of pounds of cargo back to Earth. The cargo inside includes some samples from continuing human research and some hardware and other items. All of the cargo will be offloaded after we get the crew out following splashdown, and the scientific samples will then be sent to researchers for final analysis. The crew also took time to get their SpaceX suits unpacked and ready for their journey home. Since getting the hatches closed around 9:20 a.m. Central Time, all 4 astronauts are now suited up and in their seats and standing by for undocking. We'll continue through to a final go-no-go poll coming up in just a few minutes, where the joint SpaceX and NASA teams make their final call for Dragon to depart station. This is one of many checkpoints in the return that will continue all the way until just before the deorbit burn, giving mission managers multiple chances to assess the weather at the splashdown zones and making sure everything is lining up before Dragon departs. So we'll stand by for the final go-no-go, but for now, everything's continuing to look good here. And on-time departure of 11:05 a.m. Central Time. With that, I'll throw it back over to you guys. Over to you, Kate and Sandra.
Thanks, Shaniqua. All good news to hear. Now, separation is set for approximately 9:05 a.m. Pacific or 16:05 GMT, which is just a couple minutes from now. At the moment, Dragon, which you see there on your screen, is in its final configuration before undocking, and we are waiting for mission operators to conduct their go-no-go poll on whether to move forward with the undocking procedure.
And just like during its approach to the International Space Station, Dragon's departure and deorbit is designed to be fully autonomous, requiring no action from the crew on board, which is even easier this time around since the crew won't have to stop at any waypoints like when we see a vehicle arrive.
Now, once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers, or for departure.
Station Houston on Space to Ground 2 for exercise.
All right, see ya.
Go for exercise on 2.
Yeah, until we complete undock, ARED, we have a constraint on ARED exercise. So can you let Sergey know he is no-go on ARED, and actually it's all exercise?
No exercise until undock complete. Thank you.
Now, once the undocking sequence is complete, Dragon will use its Draco engines, which you see a couple of those thruster ports there on your screen. It'll use those Draco engines to thrust away from the station in a series of carefully choreographed maneuvers or 4 departure burns to increase the distance between the spacecraft and the space station. From there, a phasing burn will place Dragon on a trajectory back to Earth.
And next on its trip is
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop. Vestibule leak check nominal, and we're going to step into residual depress imminently.
And continuing to step through those procedures ahead of undocking today, hearing everything continues to move smoothly. So next on its trip home, following what Kate just discussed, is deorbit, entry, and landing, which covers all operations after the final departure maneuver. So that includes trunk separation, closure of the nose cone, a deorbit burn, deployment of the drogue and main parachutes, and finally splashdown off the Florida coast, at which point our teams will recover the Crew 4 astronauts inside Crew Dragon from the water.
It's always super exciting to follow along. Now, we are expecting that go, no-go poll to occur in about 2 minutes or so. Again, that is basically the last poll for the mission operators to basically make sure that everything, both on board Dragon and on board station, to everybody to confirm between here in Mission Control on Hawthorne, as well as Mission Control over at NASA and at Johnson Space Center, basically for all teams to make sure that everybody is thumbs up for undocking from the International Space Station. And there's our first live look actually inside the capsule with our Crew 4 astronauts there. As you can see, they're all buckled in, their suits are on, and everyone looks pretty comfy to me.
Yep, absolutely. And the crew will remain in these suits during the dynamic phase of the mission. So once they are undocked successfully and a little bit away from the space station, they will be able to take those suits off. But we are targeting a pretty short phasing from undocking to splashdown. So we heard a call earlier that they're only going to be out of their suits for about 2 hours or so, and then they'll put them back on, get suited, and get ready for re-entry and splashdown.
Yeah, now while they have their suits on, they are, and as in their seats, as we see here, they are plugged in to the umbilical, which is basically the connection point between the suit and the seat, and therefore the spacecraft as a whole. So as they're sitting here, they're able to be connected like with electronics, avionics, so those communication systems that we will hear as they speak back and forth to core here at SpaceX Mission Control. But also they have fresh air being flowed through the suit, so I don't have to worry about them really being uncomfortable because they have cool nitrox or nitrogen oxygen mixture being pumped through the suit to help regulate their body temperature and keep them comfy.
And speaking of umbilicals, there's some other umbilicals that are going to come into play here in just a few minutes when we do have the undocking sequence that begins. There's umbilicals that will retract, and those are providing the power right now for Dragon. Once it does depart from the space station, Dragon will receive power from the solar cells on Dragon, which you may have seen when we had the view of Dragon, which is, of course, currently docked, but won't be for very long. We have the go, no-go poll coming up in just a couple of minutes from now, and if all goes well, then we'll undock just a short time from now also.
I would imagine at this point in time, this crew has been on station for months, right? I bet they're excited to come home and see their families. But I would also imagine that this moment might be a little bittersweet, Sandra. Like their home away from home is on station, and here they are buckled in, and only hours away from splashing down at this point. So I could imagine that there is excitement, but also a little bit of sadness that their journey in space is coming to end, at least for now.
Yeah, I'm sure. They've been on station for 170 days, actually, which is just shy of 6 months. They arrived on April 27th. So the crew has actually completed over 2,720 orbits of Earth during their time on station, and has traveled over 72 million miles cumulative, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I'm sure you're right. I bet there is some bittersweetness to it. Excited to see your family, but sad to be leaving this environment.
On the Big Loop, final reconfigurations for undock are complete and nominal. Houston and Hawthorne teams have pulled go for undock sequence start at 1600 and separation at 1605. Confirm visors down and crew are ready for undock and departure.
And SpaceX Freedom copies pull the go for undock. Our visors are all secured closed, and we are ready for undock.
Copy all.
So we did just hear the confirmation that Dragon has the go to undock. So we are now waiting for that undocking sequence to begin. It should start in just about 2 minutes from now. And once that sequence does begin, it will take less than 5 minutes for Dragon to separate from the International Space Station. It's home for nearly 6 months.
Now, the first step in that automatic undocking sequence is for the umbilicals to retract, as Sandra mentioned earlier. These umbilicals connect Dragon systems to the space station, which transfer power, telemetry, and commands between the two vehicles throughout Dragon's stay. And once that's complete, Dragon will unlatch itself from the space station by releasing 12 hard capture hooks in 2 separate phases. All of that combined will take roughly 4.5 minutes, and then Dragon will be ready to depart from station and begin to move itself further and further away using its Draco thrusters.
And Dragon's initial departure from station is a little different than other docked vehicles like the Soyuz that rely on springs to push them away from the docking port. Dragon will execute 2 short thruster firings to undock using a combination of the 12 Draco engines around the base of the capsule, with the first breaking any stiction between Dragon and the docking port, and the second slowly backing the spacecraft away. So we're expecting the call for the undocking sequence to begin in just moments from now.
SpaceX on the big loop, undock sequence commanded.
And there you heard it.
Perfect timing, Sandra. So live view there of the Dragon capsule. As we were talking a little bit before, those are the solar panels that you see there on the trunk portion of Dragon. We will, of course, be separating.
Freedom SpaceX, umbilical demate, complete and nominal.
Good news there. It sounds like we got confirmation that those umbilicals that we were just talking about that help connect the station to Dragon while it's on board have nominally disconnected.
And so as we said, it will be less than 5 minutes from the point that sequence was sent, which was at 9 a.m. So about 4 minutes from now, we should be able to see some of the first movement as Dragon slowly backs away from the space station.
So as I was mentioning before, the black portion that's there, that is the trunk. We will be separating that from the Dragon capsule. The small silver line that you see at the bottom part of the Dragon capsule itself, that's the heat shield, which of course is necessary to reveal in order for them to make atmospheric reentry. So we will be, after Dragon moves away from station, we will be separating. But I love this view that we have because it's such a gorgeous view of those solar panels, which we make here in-house, as well as the trunk itself. So I love that we're able to see that configuration basically in its last time before it deorbits and eventually, burns up in the atmosphere.
So with Dragon now getting ready to undock, let's check in with Shaniqua Vereen in Mission Control at the Johnson Space Center.
Thanks, Sandra. And we do have that confirmation of umbilical has retracted and the command for undock has been sent. Next up, we'll be looking for umbilical retraction and look for 2 sets of 6 hooks to open. That will take just a couple of minutes. And we have a first set of those hooks open. and the second set are moving. That's six hooks open, and we're working on the next 6, a total of 12 hooks in all that will be open today.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, all hooks open.
Copy. See the birds.
And Dragon separation confirmed.
Thank you.
All 12 hooks now open. Hooks all open and release confirmed at 11:05 a.m. Central Time, while Dragon and the International Space Station flew 259 statute miles above the North Atlantic Ocean.
Freedom Station on the big loop.
Station.
We're sad to see you go. We wish you Godspeed, safe re-entry and landing, and calm seas. We're going to miss you guys. We're thankful for your mentorship. Enjoy your time with your families.
For the good work station. It was an absolute pleasure and privilege to serve on the space station these past 6 months, and a joy to get to work with you all for the past couple of weeks. We know that you're going to continue to do amazing things on station. We look forward to seeing you back home as well.
And those were words from the crew on the ISS to the crew inside Dragon Freedom, giving them farewells as they head on their journey back to home on Earth.
And Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 0 was nominal.
Copy.
For astronauts, time aboard the orbital outpost is complete following a 6-month science and research mission. Undocking occurred at 11:05 a.m. Central Time, 12:05 p.m. Eastern Time, while the International Space Station was flying over the North Atlantic Ocean. Next up will be a series of departure burns to push Dragon further from the space station. To take us through those burns, I will turn it back over to Hawthorne. Kate, Sandra?
Thanks, Shaniqua. I just want to point out that awesome view that we had moments ago. There it is. That is a view from Dragon as it leaves the International Space Station. So it's incredible that it was just there moments ago and it's moving already as we can see further and further away.
And they were docked to the Node 2 Zenith port, or space-facing port. And you did see a little bit of those thruster firings take place already. That was for burn 0, which we did hear was nominal. Lasted just a couple of seconds long, but that little bit was enough to push it away from the space station. And we are now awaiting departure burn 1.
So there's a live view inside Dragon Freedom. On the right-hand side would be Pilot Bob Hines, and on the left-hand side would be Commander Kjell Lindgren.
And they'll continue to monitor on the screens inside of Crew Dragon Freedom as they continue the journey back home, but we are hearing that everything is proceeding as expected. We are targeting that departure burn 1 about 2 minutes from now.
Departure burn 1 will increase that initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station. At this point in time, we are utilizing the Draco thrusters, which are on board Dragon. This departure burn, we're expecting it to last about 21 seconds. At this point, Dragon is steering itself. The approach and undocking, basically getting to station and leaving it, everything is autonomous. However, the crew is able to take over at any point in time if necessary. But as you can see right there, they're able to follow along with everything happening with the capsule and their progress for their departure there on those screens that we saw moments ago.
Yeah, exactly right. And during docking, when we have a vehicle that's approaching space station, it can take a little bit longer because we have these hold points that we wait at for safety purposes and precautions. But during undocking, it can happen a lot quicker. And you really saw that. They just undocked a few minutes ago, and now they're already backing away. We're moving into the next departure burn, which we should hear the call out that it has begun any second now. And again, you said this is a pretty short burn, will only last about 20 seconds or so.
So standing by for the call that departure burn 1 has begun. Again, departure burn 1 will last for about 20 seconds.
And we are hearing that the burn is underway. So this burn is going to increase the initial opening rate between Crew Dragon and the space station. And as you mentioned, Kate, that this burn utilizes the service section Dracos.
Freedom, SpaceX on the big loop, depart burn 1 nominal. At this time, you are go to dock suits per procedure 4.012 if desired. If you do take the suits off and stow them, we ask that you stow with visors closed. And finally, a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Freedom copies, we are good to dock suits. When we stow them, we'll stow them with visors closed. And we will come off the big loop as we exit the ellipsoid.
Good copy.
And we did hear confirmation that that departure burn 1 is complete and went perfectly as expected. It lasted 21 seconds and used those service section Dracos. We also heard some words from the ground up to the crew letting them know that they have the option to take off their spacesuits if they would like. They don't have to though, but if they would care to do so, they're able to do so now at this point. Dragon is already about 175 meters away from the space station, and so the next major milestone that we're looking for is when Dragon exits the keep out sphere. That's that imaginary sphere or boundary 200 meters in radius around the space station, and it is one of several safety zones set up to govern visiting spacecraft either arriving or departing the space station. But before moving into the keep out sphere, spacecraft have to be configured where they would not cross the imaginary boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if the spacecraft lost all maneuvering for some reason. So the vehicle is now about 207 meters away.
And Freedom SpaceX on the big loop to confirm cameras are external.
Freedom copies, cameras are external.
So that was SpaceX Core, which you see there. All solid moments.
Freedom departs the Keep-Out Ellipsoid. I want to just thank the Space Station program and all of our international partners for the incredible training and on-orbit support. It's been an incredible 6 months, and we're looking forward to getting home to our families. Thanks so much.
Sounded like some nice words there from Commander Kjell Lindgren.
Freedom, we appreciate those kind words. We will miss you, and we look forward to seeing you back home. And ISS, the Dragon has exited the Keep-Out sphere.
As you just heard there, we just got word that Dragon exited the Keep-Out sphere. As Sandra mentioned, it's an imaginary boundary around the station. The next event that we are standing by for is for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid. I just want to mention real quick that view on screen there is SpaceX Mission Control, which is just to the left of Sandra and I. That's where SpaceX Core, or Crew Operations and Resources Engineer, Jake Vendel, is standing by. That is the primary voice that you hear communicating to the crew, at least whenever they are speaking to Mission Control here in Hawthorne. We also, of course, have Mission Control Houston over at NASA's Johnson Space Center, and that was the voice that we heard just moments ago of Kjell speaking to. And there's that live view of Johnson Space Center Mission Control now. So both teams are integrated and working together and communicating with station and with crew as we have their departure now confirmed, and they are now making their way further and further away from the station. Now, as I mentioned before, as we are waiting for Dragon to exit the approach ellipsoid, or AE, as you hear it referred to, another imaginary shape that we have. This time, it's a three-dimensional ellipsoid, which measures 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, and that's in the same family as the Keep-Out sphere. One of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside it have to be on what we call a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. That means that the spacecraft would not cross into the approach ellipsoid for at least 24 hours again, even if it lost all of its maneuvering capability. So we will be listening in for that call out once we hear confirmation that Dragon is outside that approach ellipsoid, or AE. And that's a live view from the station looking at Dragon Freedom.
And so at this time, Crew Dragon Freedom is 378 meters away from the International Space Station. So we are standing by for confirmation that we have exited the approach ellipsoid. We are expecting that about 5-6 minutes from now. So we are getting closer. But as you mentioned, we can continue to see Dragon get smaller as in this view from the International Space Station. Again, there are 4 crew members inside Crew Dragon Freedom. That includes NASA astronauts Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, and Jessica Watkins, as well as European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti. They have been on board the International Space Station for 170 days now, after they launched from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on April 27th.
As I mentioned earlier in the webcast, at this point, I would imagine that the astronauts are excited to come home. It has been nearly 6 months since they've seen their families, but I would also imagine that this moment is pretty bittersweet. They have done they've worked really hard while on station. They've done lots and lots of science. Sandra mentioned that they have, what was the number that you had earlier? It was thousands of orbits. I can't remember quite what it was off the top of my head, but they have traveled so far during their 6-month stay up on station, and they're home away from home at this point. So I'm sure they're very much looking forward to getting back to their families here on Earth. But I'm sure that, the next basically 5.5 hours are bittersweet, because it's their last visit And there we actually, if you look at the Dragon capsule there, we can actually see the thrusting in action of those Draco thrusters that we were mentioning before. That's what Dragon is using to maneuver away from the space station.
And all of that is done autonomously, as we've mentioned several times in the broadcast. But just to jump back to your point on the numbers, so they, again, have been on board station for 170 days. They've orbited the Earth 2,700...
Freedom, SpaceX on Dragon to ground. Comm check on the cabin mic came through. How us?
We have you loud and clear. Thanks.
So that was just a quick comm check. Now that the crew members are doffing or taking off their spacesuits, they no longer have that in-air communication because their helmets are off, so they're going to be using the in-cabin microphone to communicate with ground teams.
Freedom has you loud and clear of Dragon to ground.
Copy all. Good to hear you on Dragon to ground.